A courtroom, a place where justice is supposed to stand above all, a symbol of fairness and equality. But what happens when the very system designed to protect the innocent becomes a weapon of oppression? When a judge sworn to uphold the law allows prejudice to dictate a decision that will forever change the life of a Black mother. This is not just a story about one case. It's a reflection of a justice system that too often fails those it claims to serve. Angela Williams, a devoted mother and community leader, found herself facing the unthinkable, a life sentence handed down not by evidence, but by the biases of the man in the robe. What the judge didn't know, however, was that Angela's husband wasn't just another supporter in the courtroom. He was the mayor of the city, a man with the power to challenge the very system that had condemned his wife. Set in a city grappling with its own history of inequality in the early 2000s, this case sparked outrage, forcing the community, the legal system, and the nation to confront uncomfortable truths about race and power. This isn't just a courtroom drama. It's a battle for justice that reveals the cost of discrimination and the resilience of those who refuse to accept it. Stay with us as we uncover the callous decisions, the unexpected twists, and the fight for redemption that captured the attention of a city and beyond. Like, comment, and subscribe for stories that demand accountability and give voice to the unheard. Angela Williams, a dedicated mother and community advocate known for her resilience and commitment to her family. Judge Robert Thompson, a seasoned judge with a reputation for strict sentencing, whose impartiality comes into question. Michael Williams, Angela's supportive husband, recently elected as the city's first Black mayor, striving for justice and equality. The city of Brooksville, with its historic neighborhoods and a community grappling with its past and present racial dynamics. Angela is accused of a serious crime under dubious circumstances. As her trial unfolds, the judge's biases become apparent, leading to a severe sentence. Unbeknownst to him, Angela's husband holds significant political power. As the trial of Angela Williams unfolded, the cracks in the foundation of justice grew impossible to ignore. The courtroom became a battleground, not of evidence and reason, but of bias and manipulation. Witness after witness took the stand, but their testimonies, which could have painted a clearer picture of Angela's innocence, were dismissed outright. Critical evidence, painstakingly gathered by her defense team, was deemed irrelevant, as though her fate had been sealed before the trial even began. Outside the courthouse, the streets buzzed with growing tension. Angela's story began to circulate through the community, igniting conversations about fairness and justice, or the lack of it. Local news outlets picked up the story, showing a divided city. On one side, those demanding answers, and on the other, those who preferred the status quo to remain unchallenged. The coverage fanned the flames, with reporters asking the questions everyone feared. Was this trial about the law, or was it about Angela's race? Angela's family became the reluctant center of attention. Her children, once shielded from the harsh realities of the world, now found themselves grappling with a painful truth. Their mother wasn't just fighting for her freedom. She was fighting against a system that refused to see her as anything more than a statistic. At school, their classmates whispered, and at home, the weight of uncertainty hung over them like a storm cloud. Meanwhile, her husband, Mayor Michael Williams, maintained a calculated silence, knowing that his every move was being scrutinized. In the courtroom, the judge's demeanor grew more telling with each passing day. He interrupted Angela's defense attorney repeatedly, his tone sharp and dismissive. The prosecutor, on the other hand, seemed to enjoy an unusual level of leniency. As Angela's team tried to introduce new evidence, a piece of surveillance footage that could have exonerated her, the judge ruled it inadmissible without explanation. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating, and yet the judge appeared unmoved, as though Angela's life was just another case file to him. Hints of a deeper connection began to emerge, though quietly at first. Whispers circulated about Angela's husband's identity, but the judge seemed oblivious, or perhaps unwilling, to recognize the man seated in quiet support behind the defense table. The anticipation of this revelation grew with every passing day, as though the city itself was holding its breath. Beyond the courtroom, Angela's community rallied to her side. Neighbors and activists shared stories of her kindness, her commitment to helping others, and her role as a leader. A local pastor recalled how Angela had organized food drives for struggling families. A former colleague recounted how she had once fought for better working conditions for employees in a local factory. These stories painted a picture of a woman who was anything but the criminal the court portrayed her to be. Protests began to form outside the courthouse, peaceful but resolute. Signs bearing Angela's name and messages of support filled the streets, and chants for justice echoed through the city. Among the protesters were faces, young and old, black and white, all united by a single demand: that the trial be conducted fairly, without prejudice. As the trial dragged on, Angela's resolve remained unbroken, but the emotional toll was undeniable. In a letter read aloud by her attorney, she described the pain of being separated from her family, the fear of what might happen if she were found guilty, and her hope that justice would prevail. The courtroom fell silent as her words hung in the air, a powerful reminder of the humanity at the center of this legal battle. But the judge remained unmoved, his rulings increasingly skewed. It was as though he believed his power was absolute, that no one could question his decisions. Little did he know that his authority was about to be challenged in a way he never anticipated. The tension was thick, the stakes higher than ever. The question on everyone's mind was no longer just about Angela's innocence. It was about whether the justice system itself could be held accountable. And as the trial continued, one thing became clear: the fight for Angela's freedom was about more than one woman's life. It was about confronting the very systems that had allowed this injustice to happen. Stay with us as the case reaches its boiling point and the revelation that no one saw coming changes everything. Like, comment, and subscribe to follow this gripping story to its conclusion. The courtroom was still. The gavel had fallen, and the sentence had been pronounced. Angela Williams, a mother, a wife, a pillar of her community, had been condemned to spend the rest of her life behind bars. Her children wept silently in the gallery, while her defense team sat in stunned disbelief. The judge, cold and unmoving, gathered his notes, seemingly unaffected by the life he had just upended. It appeared the story would end here, a tale of injustice swept under the rug of an indifferent system. But outside those courtroom walls, the story was only beginning. As reporters gathered in the courthouse lobby for the routine post-sentencing press conference, Angela's attorney approached the podium, flanked by a man who had until now stayed in the background. Calm but resolute, this man stepped forward. "Before we answer any questions," the attorney began, "I would like to formally introduce you to Mayor Michael Williams, the husband of Angela Williams." The room froze. Reporters glanced at one another, unsure if they had heard correctly. The cameras zoomed in as Mayor Williams raised his hand in a gesture for silence. The air was electric. This was not just a case of wrongful sentencing. This was a case with far-reaching implications. As Michael Williams spoke, his voice steady but filled with emotion, he recounted the ordeal his wife had faced. "Angela is not just my wife. She is a mother, a community leader, and an innocent woman. Her conviction is not only unjust, it is a glaring example of the systemic failures we must confront. This is personal for me, but it should be personal for all of us." Inside the judge's chambers, the revelation hit like a thunderclap. Judge Robert Thompson, who had prided himself on his tough-on-crime reputation, was now at the center of a scandal he never saw coming. He had treated Angela as just another defendant. But now, the world saw her as the wife of a mayor, a man who wielded significant influence. The judge's confidence faltered as whispers began to circulate in the corridors of power. His impartiality, or lack thereof, was now a matter of public record, and his actions would not go unchallenged. The news spread like wildfire. Major media outlets picked up the story within hours, and social media platforms were ablaze with outrage. Hashtags demanding justice for Angela began trending nationwide. Protesters, who had once been small in number, now flooded the streets, carrying signs with slogans like "Justice for Angela" and "No more biased judges." The courthouse steps, once a quiet backdrop, became a battleground for cries of accountability. The scrutiny on Judge Thompson intensified. Journalists began digging into his past rulings, unearthing a troubling pattern of disproportionately harsh sentences against Black defendants. Stories surfaced of similar cases, of lives ruined by his decisions, and of a judicial system that had allowed such behavior to persist unchecked. Legal experts weighed in, some calling for an immediate review of Angela's case, others demanding the judge's removal from the bench. Calls for disbarment grew louder as the evidence mounted. At City Hall, the mayor found himself in an unenviable position. As a husband, his heart broke for his wife and their children. As a public official, he faced immense pressure to act swiftly and decisively. His office became a revolving door of advisors, activists, and community leaders, all urging him to use his position to demand justice, not just for Angela, but for everyone who had suffered under a biased system. The stakes had never been higher. This was no longer just about Angela's life sentence. It was about the integrity of the justice system itself. The city was thrust into the national spotlight, and the pressure was mounting on everyone involved. For Angela, the sentence was devastating, but for Judge Thompson, the fallout was just beginning. And yet, despite the turmoil, there was a sense of momentum. This revelation, painful as it was, had opened the door to a broader conversation about accountability, equality, and the true meaning of justice. The fight was far from over, and the next steps would determine not just Angela's fate, but the future of a city grappling with its own identity. Stay with us as we delve deeper into the fallout of this revelation and the battle that lies ahead. Like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that demand answers and inspire change. The courtroom was packed, but this time it wasn't for Angela Williams' trial. This time the tables had turned. Judge Robert Thompson, once the face of authority, now sat under the spotlight facing a special hearing to determine whether his conduct on the bench violated the very principles he was sworn to uphold. The tension in the room was palpable. Every seat filled with journalists, activists, and citizens who had followed Angela's case and demanded answers. Outside, the courthouse steps teemed with protesters, their chants growing louder as the hearing began. Angela's legal team opened with a blistering argument, painting a clear picture of how systemic bias had not only influenced the trial, but had also tainted the broader judicial system. Evidence was laid out methodically, each piece more damning than the last. Case files from years past were introduced, revealing a troubling pattern in Judge Thompson's rulings: disproportionately harsh sentences for Black defendants, leniency for others, and a blatant disregard for exculpatory evidence. One of the most powerful moments came when Angela's lead attorney replayed a key segment from the trial, highlighting the judge's dismissive tone and outright refusal to consider crucial evidence that could have exonerated her. Gasps echoed through the room as the inconsistencies were laid bare for all to see. "This is not justice," the attorney declared. "This is a travesty, and it is not just Angela Williams who has suffered. It is every individual who has come before this court and been denied their rights." The hearing wasn't just about the judge, however. It became a platform for the community to speak out. Testimony after testimony came from those who had experienced similar injustices, painting a broader picture of how systemic racism had infiltrated the justice system. A retired public defender took the stand, recounting how her pleas for fair treatment of her clients were often met with indifference or hostility. A pastor spoke about families shattered by decisions made in Judge Thompson's courtroom. And then, in a moment that silenced the room, Angela herself was called to testify. Escorted to the witness stand, Angela's composure was both remarkable and heartbreaking. She spoke not just about the trial, but about the sleepless nights, the weight of separation from her children, and the fear that she would never see justice. "I have lived through a nightmare," she said, her voice unwavering. "But this isn't just my fight. This is the fight of every Black mother, father, and child who has ever stood in a courtroom and wondered if they would be judged fairly." Meanwhile, Judge Thompson attempted to defend his actions. He cited legal precedents, procedural justifications, and claimed impartiality, but his words rang hollow. His demeanor, once commanding, now seemed desperate. Each argument he presented was met with counterpoints from Angela's team, who systematically dismantled his justifications. His past rulings were scrutinized, his biases exposed, and his authority undermined. The more he spoke, the clearer it became that he had no defense against the overwhelming evidence of his prejudice. The climax came when the review board delivered their decision. In a unanimous ruling, they declared Judge Thompson's conduct as grossly inappropriate, citing his failure to maintain impartiality and his evident bias throughout Angela's trial. The crowd erupted in applause as the board announced that Angela's conviction was overturned and her record would be cleared. The judge, now stripped of his position, was escorted out of the courtroom, his career in ruins. Outside, the atmosphere was electric. Angela, flanked by her family, stepped out to cheers from the crowd. Her children clung to her, their relief and joy palpable as cameras flashed and reporters jostled for her attention. "This isn't the end," she said, her voice firm but warm. "This is just the beginning. We need to fix this system, not just for me, but for everyone who comes after me." The story didn't end in the courtroom. It reverberated far beyond the city. The case became a rallying cry for reform, sparking discussions about accountability in the justice system, systemic racism, and the need for transparency in judicial proceedings. Community leaders began drafting proposals for change, aiming to ensure that no one else would face what Angela had endured. This wasn't just a victory for Angela. It was a victory for everyone who had fought for justice, for those who had been silenced, and for a community that had come together to demand change. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in years, there was hope. A hope that the scales of justice might one day be balanced. And with that, Angela Williams walked away from the courthouse, not just a free woman, but a symbol of resilience and a beacon for change. The courthouse steps had never seen a moment quite like this. Angela Williams, no longer shackled by the weight of an unjust sentence, stood tall, her family at her side. Her children, who had spent months fearing they might lose her forever, clung to her tightly, their smiles lighting up what had been a dark chapter in their lives. Her husband, Mayor Michael Williams, held her hand as reporters and cameras captured the moment, a family reunited, a symbol of resilience and hope. But for Angela, freedom wasn't just about walking out of that courtroom. It was about what came next. "This victory isn't just mine," she told the crowd. "It belongs to every single person who stood by me, who marched for justice, who believed in change when it seemed impossible." Her words echoed through the city, a rallying cry for reform and accountability. Inside City Hall, Mayor Williams wasted no time turning outrage into action. Within weeks of the case's resolution, he announced the creation of a judicial review board tasked with identifying biases and ensuring fairness in court proceedings. Judges, prosecutors, and defense attorneys were all called to participate in mandatory training sessions focused on racial equity and implicit bias. These reforms, though just the beginning, marked a significant step forward for a city that had long struggled with inequality. The ripple effects extended beyond the city's borders. Angela's story, amplified by national media coverage, sparked conversations in communities across the country. Civil rights organizations used her case as a touchpoint to demand broader judicial reforms. Protests erupted in other cities, calling for transparency and accountability in legal systems that too often failed the most vulnerable. Angela herself became an unexpected but powerful advocate for change. Her experience gave her a platform, and she used it fearlessly. She traveled to schools, churches, and community centers, sharing her story and urging others to stand up against injustice. "If my fight can help even one person get a fair chance," she said in an unemotional interview, "then it was worth it." Meanwhile, the legal profession faced its own reckoning. Judge Robert Thompson's removal sent a clear message: bias and misconduct would no longer be tolerated. His disbarment became a cautionary tale for those who held power in the justice system, a reminder that they too could be held accountable. Across the country, bar associations began introducing new measures to monitor judges' rulings for patterns of bias, and law schools expanded their curricula to include discussions on systemic racism in the legal system. For Angela's family, the road to healing was long but hopeful. Her children, once burdened by the weight of the trial, began to reclaim their childhoods. Her husband, though navigating the pressures of public office, remained steadfast in his commitment to both his family and his community. And Angela herself, while forever changed by the experience, found strength in knowing that her fight had made a difference. The impact of Angela's case wasn't just felt in courtrooms or city halls, it was felt in the hearts of ordinary people. Her story became a testament to the power of perseverance, the importance of community, and the necessity of holding systems of power accountable. Across the nation, people began to ask difficult questions. How many more Angela Williams are out there? How can we ensure this doesn't happen again? And what does justice really look like? Angela's journey from the defendant's seat to the forefront of a movement was a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, change is possible. It showed that when communities come together, when voices are raised and power is challenged, progress can be made. As Angela walked through the doors of her home for the first time in months, she paused, taking in the warmth of the familiar surroundings. The laughter of her children filled the air, and the weight that had pressed on her shoulders began to lift. She wasn't just back where she belonged. She was ready to fight for a world where no one would have to endure what she had. And with every step forward, Angela Williams became a beacon of hope, proving that even in the darkest of times, justice and truth can prevail. Angela Williams' story is not just a story of injustice, it is a reminder of the power of perseverance, the strength of community, and the ongoing fight for fairness in a system that too often falters. Her case shone a light on the harsh realities of racial bias in the justice system, forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths. It revealed how one person's life can be irrevocably altered by prejudice, but also how the determination of a community can rewrite the narrative. The courtroom should be a place where truth prevails, not where bias finds refuge. Angela's case is a call to vigilance, to demand accountability at every level. From the jurors to the judges, from the prosecutors to the lawmakers, no one is exempt from the responsibility to uphold justice. But cases like Angela's remind us that justice is not a guarantee, it is a fight. A fight that requires courage, commitment, and a collective voice that refuses to be silenced. This story also reminds us of the incredible power of community. Angela's freedom wasn't just the result of legal maneuvers. It was the result of countless individuals who marched, rallied, and raised their voices in solidarity. It was the neighbors who carried signs in protest, the activists who shared her story, and the family who never stopped believing in her innocence. Together, they proved that when people unite for a cause, change is possible. But Angela's story is far from unique. For every Angela Williams, there are countless others whose names and faces we may never know. This case should inspire us to ask hard questions. How many more lives have been upended by biased rulings? How do we prevent these injustices from continuing? And how do we rebuild a system that works for everyone, not just for a privileged few? These questions don't have easy answers, but the conversation must continue. The fight for true justice is a marathon, not a sprint. As Angela rebuilds her life, her story serves as a beacon, a symbol of what can be achieved when courage meets conviction and when communities refuse to back down. Her journey reminds us that change doesn't come from waiting for the right moment. It comes from creating the moment. It comes from people like you who choose to listen, to learn, and to take action. If Angela's story has moved you, if it has sparked something inside you, then we invite you to join us. Share this story, continue these conversations, and commit to being part of the change. There are so many more stories to tell, so many more truths to uncover. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more documentaries that challenge perceptions, inspire action, and give voice to the voiceless. Thank you for watching. And remember, justice requires constant vigilance and the courage to confront injustice wherever it hides. Together, we can build a world where fairness isn't just an ideal, but a reality for all.